All right, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Illinois Green Party series. I'm your host, David Rich. I have two very, very cool, very interesting guests on tonight. Very excited about this. Maria Santelli and Emily Onschuk. What did I do? Did I say it wrong?
Chuck, we were close.
Onschuk. Okay, sorry. Thank you. Please, thank you very much for coming to the show. This is great. So, Maria Santelli is a member and founder, co-founder of Conscience and War organization. And Emily knows Maria through that organization she was in the Navy, correct? And you became a conscientious objector and then were therefore discharged. And we're going to hear all about both of these things and how they're connected. So how about we start with like the organization, Conscience and War? Just tell us the backstory, the history, and the mission statement, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did not found the Center on Conscience and War.
Okay. Sorry.
I'm the current director. We've been around since 1940. And
wow.
We were founded on when it was clear that the United States was going to be entering World War II.
Yeah.
And we were founded by what is known as the traditional peace churches, the historic peace churches, Quakers, Mennonites, Church of the Brethren.
And a Baptist.
At that time, there was also a Methodist Office of World Peace. And these folks had been watching what was going on in Europe. They were watching, the unfolding of, the beginnings of World War II in Europe in the 1930s. And they were watching with particular interest because during World War I, there weren't robust legal protections for conscientious objectors. So thousands of men were brutalized, tortured, waterboarded at the hands of the U.S. military, the U.S. Army. So at that time in the World War I draft, you had to be a person of faith from a peace church. So only a church like the Quakers, Mennonites, Church of the Brethren, Amish. At that time, Pentecostals were also pacifists. Folks who know kind of modern day Pentecostals know that that's no longer true, but they were at that time. But even if you were classified as a conscientious objector, if you did come from a peace church, you still had to go in the military. You were supposed to be in a non-combat role, however, like a medic or a cook or an ambulance driver, something like that. But for many, many of these drafted men, that was participation with the war machine. Right. So they could not do that in good conscience. And if you were not from a peace church, so if you were Catholic, if you were, Presbyterian, you would not qualify, even if you did maintain personal, religious, moral, or ethical objections to taking another human life. So thousands and thousands of men were brutalized, imprisoned, tortured. We kept our conscientious objectors during the World War I draft in Leavenworth and Alcatraz. Wow. Some of the most notorious prisons were where we kept people who refused to fight and kill in war. So as it was clear that the U.S. was going to enter World War II, our founders were monitoring the situation and sprang into action with the 1940 Draft Act to make sure that there would be legally enforceable protections for conscientious objectors. And today, so that was 1940, even in the midst of the draft by the 1960s, the Department of Defense realized that there would be people already in the military, whether they were there as a result of a draft or if they had volunteered to join or been recruited to join, that there are people that could experience a change of conscience while already in the military. And so in the early 1960s, the Department of Defense instituted a policy to allow people like Emily, who have this change of heart, to seek discharge as conscientious objectors. And that's the work that's of course the bulk of the work that we do today. We work with folks who are already in the military and we help them navigate that process to get out of the military with an honorable discharge.
Oh, with an honorable discharge. Oh, well, that's great. That's even better. Yeah, because a dishonorable discharge, as far as I understand, can look not so great on a resume.
A dishonorable discharge is a felony conviction. It's very bad.
Yeah. Does it come with jail time?
If you get a dishonorable, yes. A dishonorable discharge can only come from a court-martial conviction, and it's
Okay.
part of your sentence. Yeah, it's a very serious thing.
I
There's
didn't.
there's other discharges that are bad, what they call bad paper, but a dishonorable is something very specific. It's like a felony level conviction. But no, conscientious objectors, I mean, we always say the first word is conscientious objection, conscientious, excuse me. So they're usually, the best people. They're usually folks who are, respectful.
Aware of their moral center
Yes.
and like actually have a conscience and not just like blindly obey like stupidity and tyranny.
Exactly.
Yeah. So is Conscience and War the organization? Is it a legal organization? Are you lawyers?
We do have a staff attorney, but this
Okay.
is an administrative process.
Okay.
So it usually doesn't, require any legal action. It's an administrative process. If someone is denied, which happens very, very, very rarely because we try to prepare people as best we possibly can. But if someone is denied, then their recourse is to go to the courts. I've been here for 13 years. We've done that one time, because we try to get people out the first time.
Sure.
but but sometimes we do need an attorney, to help us get access. The Air Force particularly can be pretty prickly about letting us, kind of into the official processes. So that's when we call on our staff attorney and say for her, the weight of her esquire to get us.
Right. And Emily, of course, I want to hear your story, but before I forget, because I probably will forget, so I want to ask this real quick, Maria. Legally, like, how can the government say or the military say we deny you? Like, I mean, isn't there sort of one reason why a conscientious objector would be a conscientious objector, and that's because they're morally opposed to killing people?
Yeah.
Like, so, I mean, like, what? There's no wiggle room for any sort of like alternative argument. It's like they're all the same thing. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. No. I mean, out of many hundreds of people that we've worked with in my tenure here, we've lost 8 cases. And I will tell you that I believe that those 8 cases were decided wrongfully. In fact, one guy I remember, I mean, he literally built a church with sticks and nails. Like he led the men's group at his church, literally built it, built the church. He couldn't have been more classically pacifist Christian, inspired by Jesus's gospel of nonviolence. And he was denied. We think that, he just was unfortunately at the bottom of the stack that day. And the Secretary of the Air Force had already, agreed, approved 5 other applications that day, other clients that we were working with who got their approvals that same day. And he was on the bottom of the stack. And the secretary at the time said, "I'm not approving this person."
Wow. That's crazy.
That's my estimation of the situation, because the denial was baseless. It was completely baseless. But this gentleman didn't want to take it to court. So, he just worked out his term. Another person was a very high ranking officer who had been in for many, many years and had a history of both her parents being career military. I think because as soon as she was denied, the personnel office came to her and said, "Apply for discharge for different reasons and we'll approve you." So I think they just didn't want the statistic of conscientious objector on the records for a very, very high-ranking military officer.
Yeah, that doesn't look good on them.
Right, it doesn't look good, and I think that the DoD doesn't want to make it look like this is easy for people to get out this way. It is a very high bar. The burden of proof is on the applicant. So it's not something that anyone can fake their way through. It's a very rigorous process. And Emily can certainly, I think, attest to that. It's not a cakewalk, but yeah, I think they don't want to approve 100% of the people. So they are, some people are made examples of.
That's just, that itself is a moral quandary. Just treating people like they're little pawns in your little game. Like you just why would you want to keep somebody who doesn't want to be there? Like, the all volunteer military is very effective. It's working. We don't need to force people to be in the military. You're going to be fine. As far as like numbers go, so obviously it's some other reason. It's just, control or whatever. All right, Emily, tell me your story. What's going on? Whatever.
Well, Maria, gave me a lot of groundwork to work with there. So I, where do I start at the beginning? So I come from a military family. My great grandfather was in the Italian Navy. Grandpa was in the U.S. Navy. Dad flew for the Navy. Godfather was, flew fighter jets, like lots of Navy. So growing up, it felt like a very obvious path for me. My dad spent a lot of time in Iraq and Afghanistan. I still have an adventure bug, and I was like, this seems like an obvious choice. When you're a kid and you watch all the movies and you're born into it, it just felt like a very obvious thing to do. And college was free, right? So that's huge.
Yeah, no, that is huge.
So that was definitely a factor in my decision making. So I, spent my high school years angling towards an ROTC scholarship. I worked on getting my pilot's license because I wanted to be a pilot. I go to the University of Miami, Ohio, with my scholarship. And, I'm on track to commission. I end up finding other interests within the Navy. Combat opened up to women. So I started pursuing a combat role, which I'll get into in a minute. But so, this was really kind of like my whole life, right? I was very gung-ho about it. And in the midst of this is where my story sort of deviates from the norm. My younger brother was radicalized online to the alt-right. So yeah. So from a very young age, he was about like 11 or 12 when it started, and sort of like sunk his, the internet, the darker corners of the internet really captured him. And that is a fight that my family fought for 7 years until he was ultimately killed by a member of the same alt-right group. So,
oh my,
yeah. So it's a big, big story, but so I'm in this pipeline, right? So I end up being the first female Navy SEAL candidate is the path that I was pursuing. So when I say gung-ho, I was like, you couldn't get any more gung-ho.
Navy SEAL. Yeah. That's intense.
Yeah. So
I saw the movie G.I. Jane.
It's just like that, and that it's not at all like that. You do wear white t-shirts. I guess there's that.
That's the only similarity. Okay.
Yeah, well, there's some other ones, but so that was the path I was on, and my brother gets killed, and really it throws my whole world upside down. So my brother gets killed right before I show up for a selection for the SEALs. And everything in my life just takes on a different meaning, right? Surrounding guns and violence, because up until that point, they were like, guns were a hobby, guns were a toy. Violence was something that never felt very close to me. And that was not the case anymore, right? So my brother's case was, pretty extreme, pretty public, and just brought a lot to the forefront that I hadn't had to contend with before. And then to add to the pressure cooker, I'm in Coronado. I'm at SEAL officer assessment and selection. And at the end of the day, SEALs that's their mission, is to go kill people, right? We don't say that explicitly for a variety of reasons, I guess. But, and I feel, looking back on little Emily, I'm like, oh, honey, what did you think you were going to do? Like, oh, I really thought I was going to be like a superhero, right? Like everyone's cheering me on. I'm the first woman. People are so excited. I've read all the books. I've seen all the movies. I'm like, I am going to go save the world. And then I was like, wait a second.
Yeah.
I'm going to go shoot someone else's little brother.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's a harsh realization there. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. So, a lot was going on in that time. I had a lot to process. I decided, SEALs weren't for me, because I had sort of felt that feeling. I was like, okay, this is not the right fit, but like, surely there's something else in the military that, I've spent my whole life trying to be here. Surely I fit in somewhere else. So I pursue explosive ordnance disposal, which is like the bomb squad type stuff. So you're still combat oriented. You still jump, dive, blow stuff up, shoot. So I was like, I'm still cool. It's like, I have to be cool. It's very important that I was cool. So
taking a very low risk position, like, bomb squad stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be totally frank. Being an officer, the most important part of your job is the office part. That's what they don't tell you when you're going through school. You're like, I'm going to be so cool. And then you're like typing an Excel spreadsheet, like all your other friends in finance. And you're like, wait a second. No one told me that.
It's just a regular job.
Yeah, so I make it through selection and training, which is 2 years of school in the military. Dive school is 1 year, EOD school is another year. I get stationed in Spain, and the pandemic happens, like the week I get there. So I'm locked inside my house for months, and I'm like, well, this isn't what I expected. I'm supposed to be like incredibly cool and important and saving the world, and I'm locked in my apartment. And so things start to, marinate and click, and frustration is finally let out. I'm starting to process things. And, I think, I don't know if other conscientious objectors feel like this, but once you start questioning things, it feels very dangerous. And you're like, oh no, this doesn't make sense. Oh no, that doesn't make sense. Oh no, nothing makes sense. And I took a lot of that, and I shoved it away, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do my job. I haven't had my platoon yet. I haven't actually done my job. I'm going to go do my job. So I get my first platoon, we start training, and then just the wheels fall off the bus left and right. My one very distinct memory of that, I was sitting in a Humvee and we were doing drills. So just to give you like the picture of like how much things didn't make sense, my platoon that I had was for underwater mine countermeasures. So that's for mines that are in the ocean. Okay. I spent a lot of time sitting in a Humvee pretending I was getting rid of IEDs in Afghanistan to train for my underwater mine countermeasures job. It didn't make a lot of sense. And so that was my life for a long time. And I was sitting in this Humvee, and it was like 98 degrees in Spain in the summer. I'm like, what the heck am I doing here? Like, how did I get here? And none of it made sense, right? I was sitting there, and I like traced this line of thinking back to like, okay, well, I'm here because we have to train, because the training manual says that, because that's what we did in Afghanistan. I'm like, but why were we in Afghanistan? No one's ever been able to tell me that. And that's another reason that I stayed in the military for so long. I think I was looking for answers, and I was hoping that if I had stayed in, things would make more sense. Like, right. I grew up under the war on terror, and I saw my dad gone all the time, and I saw things in the news. It was like, yeah, they're not, but I'm sure if I'm there, like if I'm in it, like it makes sense, right? It did not. It made just less sense every single day. So I'm going down this path. I keep pushing for probably another 4 months, and I'm in Virginia Beach. I'm training because that's where you go to train some more. We love training in the military. Mm-hmm. And I actually did an interview pertaining to my brother's stuff, because I do activism regarding radicalization and youth safety on the internet, and I did it with 60 Minutes, and that interview just sort of like blew the lid off a lot that I was holding on to. It's very easy to like squish things away when you don't talk about them, but then you have a camera crew there asking you about these things, and it's like bleh. And I walked away from that interview full of like all of these emotions that I had squished down. I was like, I can't pretend that I should be here. And I didn't know what to do with it, right? I was just like, I don't belong where I am right now. Like, the world is big. I have a lot to say. I have a lot to care about. And things are just like, I'm full of stuff. Unfortunately, kudos to the Navy. They had a very good psychologist that I worked with who very quickly asked me some questions and was like, so would you follow orders you don't agree with? And I was like, absolutely not. He's like, that is a problem. And I think you're a conscientious objector. He's like, ask me all these questions, and I start marinating on it. And I'm like, yeah, no, I have no interest in killing anyone ever. And he's like, yeah, that's a problem. I was like, that's a problem? You saying I should want to kill people? So I have this conversation with a psychologist on a Friday. He calls in his big boss, who's like a captain, and she asked me some questions. She's like, you need to tell your command. And I was like, something in me that day just like flipped. And I was like, yep, this is the only thing that's made sense to me in years. So that's when I hit the Google and I said, conscientious objector support. And I found Maria and Bill at the Center on Conscience and War. I called my command that Monday. I read them a letter that I wrote that said, hey, this is what I think I am. Because I had to be careful, right? Like, you're still obligated to obey orders. Like, I was still getting paid. I also didn't want to throw my team under the bus, because despite having, conflicted feelings about where I was, I still had people that were relying on me to like make sure their housing got paid for. And so it's, there's a mix there that I was trying to balance. But my command had no idea what to do with me. The only time people hear the term conscientious objector is like Hacksaw Ridge. And so people, it was a very disorienting experience to go back to Spain after that. And I would explain to people what I'm doing. And I'd be like, yeah, I don't want to kill anyone. They're like, but I don't want to kill anyone. I'd be like, yeah. And they're like, so am I a conscientious objector? I'm like, I don't know. So it sparked a lot of interesting conversation, but to what Maria was saying earlier, it is a really long process. So from that day when I called my command to when I got out was about 13 months. So what I like to tell people is, sorry?
Said, wow, that's a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. So imagine trying to quit your job and giving your 13-month notice.
Yeah. Right.
And with no guarantee that they'll let you out either. Right. So,
that would be very awkward every day.
Everybody
knows that you're attempting to do this, or your coworkers, if you will, or co-soldiers or whatever, are just looking at you funny, maybe judging you a lot, snickering behind your back, talking behind your back. Some of them, at least.
Yeah. And it's your most deeply held beliefs. It's beliefs that are, it's your conscience. I mean, Emily, pardon me for jumping in, but I mean, you can, I think underscore this. Like, we all know what it feels like when you do something against your conscience, right? Say you act badly, you have an argument with a loved one and you weren't at your best. That will bother you for most of us, right? That bothers us.
Unless you're a sociopath, yes.
Exactly. That's really very few of us,
Very few.
Imagine the highest, moral offense that one human can do to another, right? Take their life.
Yeah.
And that's what you have to live with for 13 months or more.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think Maria, you might have given me this phrase or I co-opted it from somewhere, but the feeling that I felt was like, first your conscience whispers at you and then it like talks. And then when you don't listen, it screams. And when it screams, like the way I was feeling when I talked to that psychiatrist or psychologist was like literally like a screaming in my chest, like something is not right and I should not be here. And I couldn't put words to it. And so through that 13-month process, right? So Marie and Bill helped me through the conscientious objector process. It involves writing a very in-depth personal statement, sort of detailing all your beliefs. You have to do a psych evaluation. You have to talk to a chaplain. You have a hearing with an investigating officer, all while existing. I was a forward operating military base. So I was isolated in a foreign country and I couldn't go home. I couldn't leave. I couldn't, I was fortunate. My command was amicable. Not everyone has that luxury. So, it's purgatory and it will push you to some edges, right? Because you have to, I reached a point where I was like, I just don't care anymore. And I will put up a sign in front of the commissary and say, ask me about being a conscientious objector and maybe they'll get rid of me faster. I thought about making a little peace sign. Like, so you have all these insignia on your uniform. I was going to make myself one and just put it there and see if they yelled at me. I just needed to do something.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, exactly. How dare you promote peace? That's awful. How dare you?
Well, honestly, so.
I thought what you were going to say, Emily, when you mentioned the phrase that you thought maybe you got from me, I thought what you were going to say was conscience is contagious. That's what I to people. And I think that that's true. And so it's so surprising to me that they don't want to expedite this process and get people out of there faster.
It's just like you were saying, I tried to tell my boss, like, you don't want me here. And they kept putting me in different jobs that I didn't want to be in. I'm like, I am like cancer. Like, they stuck me in the communication shop. Everyone got out of the Navy within 6 months. Wow. I was like, you don't want me here. I'm trying to tell you this. Like, but you're so capable. I'm like, I am very capable to my own aims, and you should probably watch out.
Emily, can I ask you a question real quick?
Absolutely.
Did anybody higher ups or equals or lowers, whatever, in the military, in your platoon, wherever you were, your base, like try to reason with you in their own sense of reason that like what you were doing was wrong?
Yeah, that's a great question. I met mostly confusion. Like I didn't encounter too many people that tried to change my mind. People were like just so caught off guard. And because of my brother's story, people didn't push too much because it made them very uncomfortable because I had legitimate,
Right.
things that they just didn't want to see me cry, really.
Right.
But I did have one higher up actually try to bribe me to stay in because they thought what was annoying, I think I mentioned this to Maria, was I came back with like, hey, I'm a conscientious objector. And they're like, no, what's the real reason? Like, who assaulted you? And I was like, no, I am this. And they're like, oh, that is me. Sorry.
Okay. Sounds like a truck backing up. Okay.
It was somewhere out in the Cambridge.
Okay.
Yeah. So people were very curious. I only met a couple folks that were combative, which was a strange experience, but they were mostly just so disarmed and confused.
Interesting. Okay. Okay.
I think that most people, if I may jump in, I don't want to step on your toes. I think that most people have a relatively easy time with their commands and with their, environment, with the other individuals in their environment. It's not too frequent that people encounter a lot of hostility, but I think the hostility, and Emily, tell me what you think about this. I think the hostility can come from when you sort of hit a nerve with someone else and their conscience, I think people can tend to get defensive. A lot of times we see, like, if a conscientious objector is because you can be moral or ethical, you don't have to be religious. That's part of the way that the law has changed over the years. So you can be an atheist and be a conscientious objector, but you can still be, of course, Christian pacifist, as long as there are beliefs that you hold. It doesn't matter what your church teaches, anything like that anymore. It's individual beliefs. So someone can come from anywhere along the sort of belief spectrum, from atheist to, religious zealot, and you can be a conscientious objector. But what we find is that some cases of hostility that people experience might be when, like, the applicant is a Christian, and then most of the chaplains in the military are Christian. A full third of them are fundamentalist Christians. So, sometimes if you're Christian and then your chaplain is Christian, you may meet some hostility. Like, it feels like, the chaplain might feel like, are you trying to tell me that you know the word of God better than I do? Something like that. Or if anyone along the decision-making chain, an investigating officer, we're dealing with writing a rebuttal this week with an investigating officer who I suspect is Christian, and the applicant is Christian. And so some things that have come up in the hearing, some of the lines of questioning that the investigating officer went down seemed to be coming from a very personal place, as if, are you telling me that I'm wrong? Are you telling me that I don't know how to live my faith?
I'm not a moral person.
Exactly. And that's not what. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that is, I think, how some people take the implication, and it is a dance to be like, these are my beliefs, and I'm like, and it's okay that you don't hold them, but people get very uncomfortable because you're bringing something to the forefront that people don't want to acknowledge or think about.
Absolutely. And I think even beyond that, you're right. Like, I mean, I think in our hearts, we know that taking another human life is wrong. As you mentioned, David, it's like, if you're a psychopath, you have no remorse. The rest of us have remorse. Yes. And the military knows this better than anyone else. I mean, all you need to do is look at basic military training. It is expressly designed to circumvent human discernment, human judgment, the conscience. It trains you intentionally to fire by rote, automatically, as a reaction without thinking. Maybe some listeners might remember Camilo Mejia, a dear person. He was the first person to resist redeployment to Iraq in 2004.
What's his name?
Camilo Mejia.
Okay.
He spent 18 months in prison. I believe it was 18 months in prison for refusing to deploy. He was so courageous. He didn't know that he can apply as a conscientious objector. He did it from prison, but he just knew he was not going back to Iraq. And one of the things that he wrote about in his book is that he fired. They were in a firefight in Iraq, and he fired without even knowing he had fired. He counted his ammunition after the firefight was over, and he had fired something, I don't know, 11 rounds or something. Don't quote me on that, but he had fired a bunch of times and wasn't even consciously aware that he had fired because his training just kicked in and he just shot, and he felt, horrible about that. And he went home on leave or he went home after his first deployment, and he refused to get back on the plane. And courageously, instead of getting back on the plane, he held a press conference. And he's a hero of that era for sure, and inspired a lot of other people to resist. But the point that I want to make with that story is that he didn't even know. And that's what military training is designed to do. Because if we think about it, and they learned this from studying wars and studying soldiers as far back as the days when we used to use muskets. I mean, there's been research that shows that there were multiple rounds loaded into muskets, which means it was never fired. And the soldier reloaded again, pretending to fire. Because you don't want to fire at another human being. We don't want to do it. They saw that in World War I. I believe it was something like between 5 and 10% of people shot to kill. World War II, the good war, 15 to 25% or something like that shot to kill. By Vietnam, 90% of soldiers were shooting to kill, because the training had evolved to address the issue, which was the human conscience. Don't give people a chance to think, because we won't fire. We don't want to kill each other. We want to work together. We want to cooperate, not kill.
That's really interesting to notice that. I'm thinking of a quote by Einstein, very quotable fellow. He said, "The pioneers of a world without war are the youth that refuse military service." Like in all the countries, people that the youth of the 18-year-olds are just like, no, we're not doing it. War goes away literally because you don't have anybody to fight it.
Exactly.
It's very difficult to get that people on the same page.
And we talked about World War I earlier, and the way we tortured, the way the United States, I say we because this is my government, the U.S. Army and the United States government allowed the torture of these men of conscience. And in testimony, I forget I could pull it up to get it for certain, but there was, some official federal government representative testifying and talking about the thousands of men who resisted, and basically said, if more young people did what these men did, we would not be able to have war. And he was sort of lamenting that.
Right.
Like, yeah, actually.
Doggone it.
Archie Bunker. I don't know if you guys remember, the show All in the Family. Archie Bunker.
Oh yeah, he was fabulous.
There's a great episode. It's a Christmas episode. I don't know what year it aired. 1970, I think, or something like that, in the middle of the Vietnam War. And they have a draft dodger come to dinner at Christmas, and everybody's trying to hide the fact from Archie because he's an old World War II veteran and a curmudgeon. And it comes out that, finally comes out that this kid is a draft dodger, and he's back in the US from Canada for Christmas. And that's what Archie says as well. He says, if all young people did what he did, you'd never be able to get a good war off the ground.
Right. Exactly. Ha ha ha. Yeah, that's fine. And then of course, President Carter pardoned all the draft dodgers from Vietnam, right?
I gave them amnesty to come back.
Yeah, which upset a lot of people. How dare they? This is all like tying in. Like, I do a lot of research on policing in America, and this is reminding me a lot of like that as well. Like how they're just like very cool people outside of their shifts, police shifts, and out of the police cars. And then, but when something happens, like their training just kicks in, and they end up like beating the hell out of somebody because they don't know when to stop, because it's just all like embedded in their brains. And of course, we have lots of problems with that as well. Wow, that's extremely interesting. So, is Conscience in War, the organization, is it currently a religious one?
No, that's our roots, though, for sure.
Right,
Our roots are in the peace churches, and
Mhm,
that
mhm.
was, because that was the law back then in the 1940s. It wasn't until actually a case started in the Korean War era, but wasn't decided until the Vietnam War had already started. We like to stack our wars in the U.S. So Daniel Seeger, he's still alive, lives in New York City, wonderful person. He was filling out his application for conscientious objection, and there was a question that said, do you believe in a supreme being? And he was
Wow.
like,
How is that possibly legal?
well, that was the law back then. You had to be religious. You had to believe in a hierarchical God. And so he went on to write an essay about, the ability to know God or something like that. And he was denied and he sued. And so then that case was decided by the Supreme Court. And they said, okay, you don't have to believe in a supreme being. That was 1965. And then in 1970, another fellow came along, being drafted, facing a draft as a conscientious objector, and he was not religious at all. His objection was purely moral and ethical. And he was denied by his draft board, again, took it to the Supreme Court and was approved. So that's the precedent that we still work from today. A case that failed at the same time, around that same time, was to allow people to be what's kind of known as like a selective objector. Listeners may remember Aaron Watada, Lieutenant Aaron Watada from the from the Iraq-Afghanistan era. He said, I would go to Afghanistan tomorrow, but I will not go to Iraq. I believe Afghanistan is a moral war. Iraq is not. And
Okay.
that is not,
I see.
that is still against the law. The law of conscientious objection is you can be religious, moral, or ethical, but you do have to oppose your participation in war in any form. So you can't say, I would fight this war, but not that war. You have to have an absolute objection to all war, which most people do, or most people who apply will get to that point, but some don't. And, there's a lot of misinformation swirling around, a lot of bad advice. Someone might say, well, I can't be a conscientious objector because I'm Catholic, and the Catholic Church teaches that there can be just war. Well, of course you can be a conscientious objector. The last 3 popes have said there's no possibility of a just war in the modern era. And
They did?
so, yeah.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah. And so there's no possibility that any war that you would face as a member of the military today would be approved by the church's teachings. And so therefore, you would qualify.
Wait, do you know the reasoning behind that? I've never heard this before.
I think essentially nuclear weapons. There's the tests for just war, right? It has to be limited in in the people that get killed. It has to be limited in the time that the weaponry, continues to kill. It has to be the last resort, the final act, instead of a preemptive and things like that.
And like one side can't have overbearing force over the other side, which is
equal. Yeah, exactly. So there's all those different tests, and even failing one, and I remember certainly nuclear weapons are, the Catholic Church has been against nuclear weapons for some time. So, yeah, but that's the law today. And even though that people can be secular, our roots are still in, in the faith community for sure. We're still very closely tied to the faith community, but our organization is secular these days.
Okay. So, do you still have a lot of churches connected to you? I mean, working with you either directly or indirectly?
Yes, definitely. We're still very connected to the peace churches, of course, the Quakers, Mennonites, Church of the Brethren, still very close with those communities. But also we're part of an interfaith network in Washington, D.C. Our office is in Washington, D.C. We're part of the Washington Interfaith Staff Community. So connected to some of those radical badasses, I came, I kind of came out of, my activism started with, the Iraq War and, Afghanistan, George W. Bush and stuff. And so I kind of saw this, this really convoluted version of Christianity, which Bill, my coworker at Center on Conscience and War, calls our national civic religion, where there's like worship of the flag right next to, sort of worship of the cross. Yeah. And so that was kind of what I saw of Christianity. I had a lot of anger toward George Bush with this holy war, and this crusade that he was on against the Middle East and against Islam and stuff. And it was very disturbing to me. But then when I came out to take this job at CCW, one of the first things that I saw were these clergy and religious leaders in Washington, D.C. being dragged out of the Capitol on their heels by police because they were protesting, for peace and a faithful budget. Many people were just arrested. Many of these faith leaders were just arrested calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. There's been many different, interfaith actions of these amazing people really moved by their faith to do really good and powerful things in the world. So, so we're still very much connected to that.
Very interesting. Emily, we haven't heard from you in a little bit. Did you have more to your story? You ended it with it took you 13 months.
No, yeah. I learn so much from Maria every time she shares, because the Center on Conscience and War is just such a rich, mix of interesting people that I'm just so grateful to have been pulled into such a vibrant community. Gosh, where was I? I mean, lots of paperwork, lots of, after the initial process, just for interested listeners. I stole this quote from Maria too. It's like writing your package is like writing a graduate thesis at like a high school level. You're just distilling the essence of your worldview. You're trying to you're essentially putting the military on trial in some ways. It is quite daunting and difficult to do, but really satisfying. My conscientious objector package is something I'm incredibly proud of. And whenever I feel like I need to reset and remember who I am, I read it, which is really cool. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But I will say that in that process, and this is something advice I give to sort of people that are in the process of becoming a conscientious objector, there is room to do good work, if you can find the space for it. So I was very fortunate. Well, fortune's a strange term, but when I was in this waiting period, Afghanistan fell and a refugee camp opened on my base. And I, they looked at me and they're like, "You're this weird, unemployable, bleeding heart officer. Go help people." And I ended up directing this refugee camp for 4 months. And that was the most enriching experience of my life. So, I ended up doing what was really, for very unfortunate reasons, a very humanitarian, heart-centered job that I'm very grateful for. So my path took away. It was a strange path, strange journey, but I was very grateful to have that experience. And I had a lot of other, I really tried to use that time to do something productive for the community, the base community. But it's still every day, I woke up and didn't know, am I going to get out today? Are they going to call me? Am I going to have to leave this country in 10 days and start my life over? Or am I going to be here for another 3 years? It definitely takes a big toll on you. I bet. Yeah. And that is something that I think a lot of conscientious objectors encounter. And then when you finally do get out, which I did again 13 months later, I came home and I told my mom, I was like, I feel like I'm in pieces, because the whole process, just everything I'd gone through in the military, the process of getting out, of not knowing, of every day waking up, it just torn me apart. And it's taken me a long time to, to get that back, because it did. Being a conscientious objector, like Maria said, it is not the easiest way out of the military. I can
imagine.
It's really hard. And I had people be like, well, why don't you just do medical? You could just say you're depressed. And I'm like, no, this is what I am. And yeah, I'm anxious and depressed, but that's
not clinically. You're not leaving the military because you're clinically depressed, right?
Yeah.
You wanted to make, and that's part of that. That's good. That's so wonderful that you did it that way, as hard as it was on yourself. Because one of the underpinnings of moral value is, courage. It's actually considered one of the top 8 virtues. Is not backing away or trying to go a different direction or deceive anybody to get out of something or into something, for that matter. So it's that's not easy. I'm not sure that if I got myself in the military that I would have done the same thing. I might be like, you know what, I have depression. I can't do this. I don't know. I don't know. But just because I want out now. kind of thing. I mean, when I was 18, I actually went to the MEPS. I scored well on their tests and everything else. I was 1 pound over their weight limit. And then the week later, he said, "Come back in a week." Within that week, exactly. I was like, "I'm like, screw this. Are you kidding me?" So,
Wow.
Fine line.
Oh,
go ahead.
No, but I think you make a really good point, David, and that's that I think there's, even though the numbers are pretty few, conscientious objectors, like the DoD says, about 100 service-wide a year. So it's not many. When you're looking at a military that's, 1.5 million people, 100 people doing this a year is not a lot.
No. And again, they can survive without those 100 people.
Yes. But I think there are people who are getting out for mental health. Or they're, self-medicating somehow and they're getting out on, because they smoked pot or they, had a DUI or something like that. Totally linked to their trauma, whether they've seen combat or not. The military environment causes diagnosable trauma for people for the reasons we spoke about earlier, because it isn't a natural condition. I think people have started to adapt and call it post-traumatic stress instead of post-traumatic stress disorder anymore.
Right.
We're also learning the term moral injury and using that more and more, and realizing that the trauma that people experience in warfare or in training for war, because that's just often can be just as traumatizing, that it causes moral injury, wounds to the soul caused by this transgression against the conscience. So people are getting out for all kinds of different reasons, or maybe we call it kind of informally discharging themselves, going AWOL. During the hottest parts of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars around like 2006 to 2008, the Department of Defense reported 50,000 people were AWOL.
How many? Say that again.
During like 2006 to 2008 period, there were like 50,000 people who had gone AWOL that the DoD admitted to.
Yeah, right. So it's probably twice or 3 times.
Yeah, exactly. We at the GI Rights Hotline, the Center on Conscience and War, is part of the GI Rights Hotline, and we do all kinds of military counseling, all kinds of human and civil rights military counseling for people. Conscientious objection is our specialty, but we help all kinds of people. So we talk with people who are AWOL, all the time, and they've gone AWOL in a lot of cases because they don't know any other way out. At that time, during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars in the middle 2000s, there were, for the Army alone, there were 2 processing stations in the U.S., one at Fort Knox and one at Fort Sill. And they were reporting 40 people a day turning themselves in there.
Wow.
So, I remember Rolling Stone reported on this. I mean, it was people discharging themselves because they could not participate in these acts that they saw were immoral. So even though only 100 or so people go through the conscientious objection process a year, many, many, many more people share the beliefs that Emily has so eloquently expressed today.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. It's really interesting stuff here. Real quick, Cyril Petty, his name is Ariel. He's a Green Party member here in Illinois. Is making. He was recently separated recently left the military. Doesn't sound like it was for the same reasons. So it sounds like he just sort of worked. He worked until he was done. And he's wondering how he can join Conscience and War.
Oh, so check us out. centeronconscience.org is our website, and hit us up. Send us an email. We'd love to hear from you. centeronconscience.org.
So is it a membership type organization? So you're an employee of it, is that correct? That's your job?
Yeah, I'm the director. We're tiny. There's only 4 of us. But yeah, I mean, we would love to amplify voices of veterans who have, who have anti-war beliefs, who are working for peace. And of course we depend on support from the grassroots. We are not, you can imagine, getting the big money from government foundations. We're doing this little kind of radical work. So yeah, any way you can spread the word and elevate the profile of conscientious objection, so more people in the military know they have a place to turn for this kind of support.
So it's Conscience. What's the website?
centeronconscience.org. Yep.
All one, obviously. Centeronconscience.org.
Yeah, and so much of what I've realized is important is just like making it known that this exists, because a lot of people don't know that conscientious objection is still a thing. They only relate it to Vietnam. And sit over there.
No. I got to figure that. I don't know why it's not scrolling like the other one. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, and so much of what I am trying to figure out in my own life is how to advocate for this, right? And let people know that there is an option, and that it and
I'm
that
gonna put it in the comments, folks, okay? Because it's not cooperating.
all right.
Go ahead.
Well, that it is an option, and that these are things that can and should be sparking discussion. Because just in my own life, right, like just seeing the conversations being had in my family with my peers, many of whom are still in the military, and navigating those relationships is there's a lot of adjectives I could use for that. But I mean, rewarding is one of them, right? Because you're having very, very frank conversations about what's going on, and it opens me up and other people, I'm sure, for people to come to them and disclose like their real thoughts and feelings that otherwise they'd hold on to.
Absolutely correct. It still baffles me that they would be so reluctant to just let you out readily. But okay, like you said, Maria, it's probably because they're just trying to save face and just trying to like show that they got the strength over anybody. It's one of those things that baffles me just about like the nature of governments themselves, that they have the right to like just have you go kill and die for something that may or may not have anything to do with you. So I mean, do you think humanity, generally speaking, obviously not every person, do you think that we're evolving morally? Do you feel like that there's like the 50,000 people who are leaving, like, left Afghanistan or whatever, because of like, moral reasons and that kind of thing? Do you think that's happening more and more? Or do you think that not? I mean, it seems to me like we're past we're not barbaric as much as we used to be. But of course we have nuclear weapons too, which is insane. But I mean, would you say yes or no to that?
Oh, yeah. I'll take it first.
No,
I want to hear what Maria is going to say too, but I think so. Absolutely. I like, despite all of the conflict I had in the military, I like people's like values are still there, and they're still very present. They're sometimes just not as loud as like the direction and the messaging. And I think people are becoming a lot more conscious just across the board. I think weirdly enough, COVID helped with that. I think people are really grappling for meaning right now and having some big uncomfortable conversations because they can't avoid them anymore. So I absolutely think that's the case. Like, I think we're trending, I have a dream where, my grandchildren, like the concept of a standing army is ridiculous. Right. Like, that's my dream. We'll see, but yeah.
Well, the quote unquote founding fathers of this country didn't envision it either. And the Second Amendment actually had a clause that said, you have the right to keep and bear arms, and, a militia, and, protect ourselves from an overbearing government and all that stuff, well-regulated militia. It also said in an early draft, it said no one should be compelled to bear arms against their will.
Oh, wow, really?
That was an early draft of the Second Amendment, but they didn't envision a standing army. And so they thought, well, James Madison favored brevity. So he said, we don't need to say this. We're never going to have a standing army. This is not going to be an issue. We're not going to be, drafting.
Right. People. Yeah. No, it was all about, like, even in this, the Civil War, I mean, Abraham Lincoln called up the militias to fight. That's how it was then. That's what the Second Amendment means.
Exactly.
But exactly. I need to do research. Like, I don't even know when it changed, like, from that to like this monstrosity of a military that we have. 1,000 military bases across the planet. It's ridiculous. What happened to like farmers, getting their shotguns and ready to go in case the redcoats came, to like where we're at now? It's insanity. So Ariel says no, he doesn't think that we're getting better. Go ahead, Maria. Sorry.
Well, we had a draft from 1940 until 1975, So, so that was, clearly our military's buildup, and then it's only exploded from there. But to answer your question, I think that,
sorry guys.
Bless you.
Salud. I think that I would say, like, salud. don't believe the hype, right? Like we are so manipulated into thinking that everyone supports militarism and everyone supports war as a legitimate foreign policy tool, but we really don't. And we don't support it with our bodies, right? Because when you look at who joins the military, it's fewer than 1% of us in the all recruited force, or what some people call the all volunteer force.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah.
Fewer than 1% of us have said, okay, I'll do this. I'll kill people. Fewer than 1%. But then you look at those numbers and way fewer are actually in combat positions. And most kids are joining because why? They want college money.
Right.
You know, the military did not care for Bernie Sanders' presidency because he called for free college, and they knew how this would impact.
Oh, I never thought of that. That's interesting. Yeah,
Yes, right?
Totally. Yeah.
The Selective Service Act, right? We still have young people born male in this country, still have to register with the draft. This is still a thing. And
females don't have to. Bless you.
I'm sorry.
Females don't have to.
People born female do not have to. No. Anyone born male at this point still has to register. But there were efforts because, as Emily mentioned, combat roles have been open to women. That's been since 2015, since the Obama administration. The combat restriction was lifted. So since then, there's been efforts to try and include people born female into the draft registration requirement, but it's been failing. So we'll see what's going to happen with that, because right now it is, there'd be no constitutional or no precedent that would, make it a lawful single gender registration. So right now it's ongoing, but it's continuing to be challenged. So we'll see where that ends up. But most people, given the choice, even these young people forced to register for the draft, wouldn't do it. Most people do it by coercive measures. So it used to be when President Carter, so we had a draft until 75. And then we had no draft, no registration between 75 and 80, 1975 and 1980. President Carter, of all people, if you can believe it, reinstituted draft registration because he wanted to send a message to the Soviet Union that the U.S. could be ready for war at any time. But thousands and thousands and thousands of young men resisted draft registration in the 1980s. And so then you saw the federal government and now state governments since the year 2000 instituting these coercive measures, forcing these young people to be registered. So right now, in most U.S. states, you cannot get a driver's license or a state ID unless you're registered for the draft. So you see, it's not a willful thing that people, it's not through their own will that people are participating with this coercive participation in the war machine. They are not doing it willfully. They're being registered against their will in order to access another public resource. Given the choice, we wouldn't do it.
Yeah, no, that's well said. Emma, did you want to add anything to that?
Oh no, that was just my snap of like, I want to drop the mic for Maria. Because
yeah, no, that was very well said. It's very true. Like, I mean, moral, your conscience. Okay, well, I mean, there's this idea of like personal identity, and that by the definition, some would argue, by the definition of being a person, you're a rational moral agent. Okay, and that like you have the ability to think morally and reason morally. Like, is this right or is this wrong? Is this good? Is this bad? That kind of thing. Is this just, unjust? I mean, any sort of like moral dichotomy you want to go through. You have the ability to reason that way. And everybody has a moral intuition, except for maybe sociopaths who might actually still have it. They just learn to bury it. I don't know. I honestly don't know. But like, and the one thing that also baffles me about like, again, governments and their ability to do this to people is that, they think that like, that morality is universally accessible and applicable to all people until you're in the government. Then you get to act as a person immorally. I get to go send people to kill people. I get to kill people. I get to, as a cop, I get to shackle you in chains and put you in a cage. If that imagery harkens you back to another time in American history. I get to violate your rights. I get to take away your freedom. I get to do all these things merely because I'm in the government. And I'm like, are you a person? Well, yes. Well, then you have the same moral obligations as anybody else does. Mm-hmm. That's what morality is. Now, it gets a little more complicated than that. I mean, sometimes, I mean, you just got to think long-term instead of short-term. And sometimes, like sometimes I would say it's okay. It's morally acceptable to lie. Like if it's going to save somebody's life, I'm going to tell you a lie. I'm not going to get upset about it. That kind of stuff. But the actual access to moral virtue, moral value, and the actual application of it, they are universal, and that's why it's just, again, it's hard for me to take seriously when a politician like well, we're going to send more bombs to Israel so they can kick the crap out of children in Gaza. Like, are you out of your mind? I mean, like, if there is a God, I'm not very religious, but if there is a God and there's a judgment day, you think he's not going to hold you accountable for that just because you were the president? That kind of stuff. I mean, okay, I'm sorry, I'm ranting.
No. And I mean, as Emily said, I mean, who's like, Emily, you thought about your brother and how that loss felt for you. Whose child is expendable?
Well, there's that too, like the value of the people you're contending with, or you're going, fighting against, or whatever. What really a Ghazian child isn't as valuable as an American child. I want to ask the religious right in this country too. Do you believe that God loves Americans more than anybody else? Do you really believe that? Because you're certainly acting as if that's.
I think I've encountered that, frankly. Like people, I mean, American exceptionalism is absolutely. People still believe in the Great Replacement theory. I've, and these are things that I've had to contend with on an interpersonal level with people, which is difficult, to say the least. And that was one of the hardest parts about being in the military is it's easy to talk about people in these ways, like, oh my God, who would ever believe that? But like, they're sometimes my friends where you're like, whoa, I had no idea you had that. And it's because for me, like, then villainizing them, right, is no different than villainizing all the other people we villainize. It's just so that has been one of my biggest lessons and continues to be one of my biggest lessons is when because people do believe these things, is how do I continue having those conversations? Because that's the hardest part, honestly.
So, okay, we're technically over an hour. Do you mind if I hang on to you for a couple of minutes?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, so Emily, speaking of what you just said, what are you interested in pursuing? Any sort of like lecture series or anything like that, or like writing memoirs or something, like getting the message out?
This is very funny you say this, and Maria doesn't know this.
You heard it first here, folks.
Yeah, so I actually am working with a couple of book agents that contacted me, and I'm putting together a book proposal right now, which is scaring me.
That's great.
Out of my mind. I do speak. I speak at a conference in the fall called Eradicate Hate in Pittsburgh, which is, working to end hate-motivated violence. I don't love the title. I'd rather be like promote peace or something like that.
Wait, what is the title? Say it again.
Eradicate Hate.
Okay. Oh, I saw you don't like the title because hate's in the title.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I do, a lot of my bigger thinking has happened in front of cameras or an audience because it's like that's what brings the emotions up, and you're like, whoa, I have stuff to say, and you're like, whoa, people listened. But these are the tough things. Is like, I think, we're so polarized and we want to like point fingers and be like, well, you believe this, so you're an idiot, and you believe that, so you're an asshole, and I want to stand here. And I'm like, whoa, well, that's how we got here in the first place. So like, let's have some weird conversations.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
that's great that you're looking at book deals. I mean, that's awesome. That really is. Hopefully
congratulations, Emily. That's cool. That's
that's very cool. So we're gonna have to have you back on when you're a famous author.
Hey, you heard it here first, folks.
That's right. It's right here. Breaking news here on the Illinois Green Party series. That's very cool. And besides the book deals, because I'm guessing that hasn't gone to fruition yet, but like, what do you mind if I ask what you've been doing since you got out of the military?
Yeah, I took a scenic route. I took about a year and a half off to travel, and I did a lot of things, that I had wanted to do. And I'll preface that with like, I was still very hurt inside. Sure. And I was like, I'm going to go do the Tour de Mont Blanc and then I'll feel better. And I was sitting in Chamonix looking at the Alps being like, man, I'm still fucking miserable. I was like with my best friends, I was like, this is not going well. I was in therapy at the VA, art therapy. I did my yoga teacher training. I'm a freediving instructor, all these things.
Nice.
And this brings me to like how I got to where I am now. Nothing was really helping me. I ended up I went on psychedelic therapy experience in Jamaica. So yeah, so I went with a group called the Hope Project. They support female veterans and spouses. They're attached to Heroic Hearts, which supports veterans. I had a phenomenal experience that really, for the first time in years, helped me piece myself back together. And now I work in psychedelic advocacy full time.
I love that. I would love to have you back on just to talk about that.
So I mean, I want to be clear, this whole thing was with me with my just Emily hat. I am the grassroots campaign director for the ballot initiative in Massachusetts to bring a psychedelic therapeutic framework and decriminalization to Massachusetts. So yeah, so I'm many things, and that is what I am right now. And
that's very interesting. Yeah, no, that's happening. You see that happening in a multitude of places across the country. I think you can see the Oregon or Portland, Oregon. I don't remember.
Yeah, Oregon and Colorado.
That legalized all of it. Yeah, really. I mean, in Portugal, it's kind of like the leading standard right now. They decriminalized or legalized all drugs, like all of them, and they're fine. Like everything's fine. So like it's just another thing about governments is like these 535 people like dictating the lifestyles of like 320 million. That's just stupid. And again, I'm not a full-blown libertarian, but I'm a libertarian when it comes to your body. It's my body, it's my business. Go, F yourself if you don't like it. But no, I mean, there's plenty of research done, plenty of science to back the effectiveness, the positive efficacy of hallucinogens. I mean, even before like this new thing that's going on now. I know I'm getting off topic, but for decades there were studies done that people who even through the black market took mushrooms had a generally were happier people. It does something to you that really just kind of whacks you into a positive spot, which is nice. And I did some mushrooms back in my day for sure, and I'm happy. So I'm thrilled to be alive. I love life. So that's very cool. Okay, so I don't want to keep you anymore. Ariel, so I didn't get to more of your comments. I know that Ariel's saying that they thank you for your service. And I guess I know a lot of service people who are annoyed by that. They don't like it.
I usually say thank you for your taxes when people say that.
Thank you, because I'm sorry, but I see parking for veterans only. I'm like, why? I'm like, do I not contribute to this society?
That's the whole nut. Trust me, I usually say if you knew how I spent your tax dollars, you would spit on me.
No.
Well, not literally, but I was my beachfront apartment through COVID. I wasn't contributing a whole lot.
No, it's the government spending, military spending is audacious. It's just unbelievably ridiculous.
Yeah.
There's our American military is still the number one body, or if you will, or community of people, organization that is the biggest polluter in the planet. I mean, it's just it's insane. It's hard to find it admirable. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have a military. I'm not idealistically, I think we shouldn't, obviously, but I mean, practically we might need one. But it's just way exaggerated and ridiculous. So it's craziness, and that our federal government cares more about military spending than it does taking care of its own people. That's a whole nother issue. Anyway, okay.
Or diplomacy.
Huh?
Or diplomacy.
It's all going to be in the book, guys. It's all going to be in the book.
It's all going to be in the book. All right, Maria Santelli, good Italian name, and Emily Chuck.
You got it.
All right. Thank you. And again, Ariel, thank you for tuning in and chiming in. Always a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you, Ariel. Thank you.
Yes,
thank you.
So if you can hang on after I end the stream, I would like to just kind of touch base about something. So thank you for tuning in to the Eleanor Green Party series. I'm your host, David Rich. Till next time, be good, be green.
Thanks.
Okay. There's a delay, so don't.